The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Manhattan penthouse, casting golden rays across the pristine marble floors that Elena Martinez had just finished polishing. At 28, she had learned to find dignity in her work, even when her knees ached from scrubbing and her hands were raw from cleaning solutions. This job, working for billionaire tech mogul Alexander Whitmore, was her lifeline, the thread that kept her and her 3-year-old twins, Sophie and Lucas, from falling into the abyss of poverty. Elena straightened up, pressing a hand to her lower back as she surveyed the living room. Everything was perfect, as it always was. In the 18 months she'd worked for Mr. Whitmore, she'd never received a single complaint. She took pride in that, in being invisible yet indispensable, in maintaining the illusion that his 11,000-square-foot penthouse cleaned itself. Ms. Martinez. The voice came from behind her, cold and clipped. Elena turned to find Alexander Whitmore standing in the doorway, his tailored charcoal suit fitting him like armor. At 33, he was everything the magazines said he was: devastatingly handsome, ruthlessly intelligent, and completely untouchable. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw sharp enough to cut glass, and his gray eyes held all the warmth of a winter storm. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, quickly smoothing down her uniform. "I didn't hear you come in. I was just finishing the living room. Would you like me to prepare your breakfast?" "That won't be necessary." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Your services are no longer required." The words hit her like a physical blow. Elena felt the room tilt slightly, her mouth going dry. I don't understand. Have I done something wrong?" "Your final paycheck, plus 2 weeks severance." He held out the envelope, not quite meeting her eyes. "I'll need you to collect your things and leave within the hour." Elena's hands trembled as she took the envelope, her mind racing. "Mr. Whitmore, please. If I've made a mistake, I can fix it. I need this job. My children. This isn't a negotiation, Ms. Martinez." His tone was final, dismissive. "I've made my decision." "But why?" The question escaped before she could stop it, desperation creeping into her voice. "I've worked so hard. I've never been late, never complained. I even came in on my days off when you needed extra help for your dinner parties." For just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or maybe just impatience. Sometimes circumstances change. That's all. Circumstances? Elena felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of him. "My children eat because of this job. We have a roof over our heads because of this job. What circumstances could possibly justify?" "Ms. Martinez." His voice hardened. "I don't owe you an explanation. You're an at-will employee. I'm exercising my right to terminate that employment. Now, please gather your things." He turned and walked away, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor with the finality of a judge's gavel. Elena stood frozen, the envelope clutched in her shaking hands. Around her, the penthouse she'd lovingly maintained for 18 months suddenly felt like a mausoleum, beautiful, cold, and lifeless. She thought of Sophie and Lucas, probably just waking up at Mrs. Chen's apartment downstairs where the elderly neighbor watched them during Elena's shifts. How would she tell them? How would she explain that the stability she'd fought so hard to give them was being ripped away for no reason at all? She made her way to the small storage closet where she kept her personal items, a change of clothes, photos of the twins, and the lunch she'd packed that morning but would now never eat. Her hands moved mechanically, placing items in her worn canvas bag while her mind spiraled with calculations. The rent was due in 2 weeks. The twins needed new shoes. Lucas's asthma medication was running low. "Dear God," she whispered, leaning against the closet wall. "What am I going to do?" As she walked through the penthouse one last time, Elena couldn't help but notice the photographs scattered throughout. Alexander Whitmore at various charity galas, always alone despite being surrounded by people. She'd often wondered about that, about why a man with so much kept everyone at such a distance. Now, she realized she'd been just as disposable to him as everyone else. The elevator ride down felt like a descent into uncertainty. When the doors opened on the 15th floor where she lived in a tiny apartment Mrs. Chun had helped her find, Elena paused. She could hear children's laughter echoing down the hallway, her children, blissfully unaware that their world was about to shift again. She found Sophie and Lucas in Mrs. Chen's living room, building a tower out of blocks. Sophie, with her wild dark curls and gap-toothed smile, looked up first. "Mama, you're home early." She launched herself at Elena's legs, nearly knocking her over. Lucas, more reserved like his mother, simply waved before carefully placing another block on top of their creation. "We're building a castle for the princess," he announced solemnly. Mrs. Chen appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. One look at Elena's face, and her expression shifted from cheerful to concerned. "What happened, dear?" Elena's voice cracked. The armor she'd maintained in front of Alexander Whitmore finally shattered. "He fired me. No reason. Just fired me." The elderly woman's eyes widened. "That boy. I should go up there and give him a piece of my mind." "It won't help." Elena sank onto the worn couch, and Sophie immediately climbed into her lap while Lucas leaned against her side. "I just need to figure out what to do next." "You'll find something else," Mrs. Chen said firmly, settling into her rocking chair. "You're young, hardworking. Someone will see your value, even if that foolish man couldn't." But as Elena held her children close, breathing in the sweet scent of their baby shampoo, she felt the weight of reality crushing down on her. In New York City, jobs that paid enough to support a family were rare. Jobs that offered the flexibility she needed as a single mother were even rarer. Alexander Whitmore had offered both, and now it was gone. That night, after the twins were asleep in their small shared bedroom, Elena sat at her tiny kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills. No matter how she ran the numbers, they didn't add up. The severance would cover maybe 1 month's rent, or groceries and utilities, but not both. She'd need to find work immediately, and it would need to pay at least as much as the Whitmore job had. She thought about her interview with Alexander Whitmore 18 months ago, how nervous she'd been, how desperately she'd needed the position. He'd barely looked at her resume before offering her the job, and she'd been so grateful she'd nearly cried right there in his office. Now she understood. To him, she'd never been a person with dreams and struggles and children who depended on her. She'd been a service, easily acquired, and just as easily discarded. But what Alexander Whitmore didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that Elena Martinez was a survivor. She'd survived an abusive marriage, survived escaping with 2 babies and nothing but the clothes on their backs, survived building a life from nothing in a city that chewed up and spit out people stronger than her. She would survive this too. She had to. For Sophie and Lucas, she would survive anything. 3 weeks later, Elena was running on fumes and sheer determination. She'd found work cleaning office buildings at night, a job that paid less and offered no benefits, but at least it was something. Mrs. Chen, bless her heart, had agreed to watch the twins during Elena's overnight shifts, refusing to accept more than a token payment despite Elena's protests. But the schedule was brutal. Elena would put Sophie and Lucas to bed at 7, catch a few hours of sleep herself, then work from midnight to 8 in the morning. She'd come home just in time to wake the twins, give them breakfast, and spend a few precious hours with them before exhaustion pulled her back to bed. It was unsustainable, and they both knew it, but neither woman spoke the truth aloud. On this particular Wednesday morning, Elena was walking through Central Park with the twins, trying to make the most of the sunny April day. They couldn't afford the zoo or the carousel anymore, but the park was free, and the children were young enough that chasing pigeons and collecting interesting rocks counted as adventure. "Mama, look, a puppy!" Sophie shrieked, pointing toward a frantic golden retriever that had somehow slipped its leash and was bounding through the park with wild abandon. Behind the dog, a man in running clothes was giving chase, shouting commands that the animal completely ignored. As they got closer, Elena's stomach dropped. Alexander Whitmore. She recognized him immediately, even sweaty and disheveled in athletic wear, a far cry from the impeccable suits she'd grown accustomed to. For a moment, she considered grabbing the twins and walking in the other direction. The last thing she needed was another reminder of how easily he'd upended her life. But then the dog made a beeline straight for Lucas, who had frozen in place, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. The retriever was large, enthusiastic, and completely oblivious to its own size as it bounded toward the small boy. "Lucas!" Elena lunged forward, but Sophie was faster. The 3-year-old stepped directly into the dog's path, spreading her small arms wide like a tiny crossing guard. "Stop," she commanded with all the authority a toddler could muster. "You're scaring my brother." The dog, miraculously, did stop. It sat down directly in front of Sophie, tongue lolling out, tail wagging so hard its entire back end wiggled. Alexander Whitmore caught up a moment later, breathing hard as he grabbed the dog's collar. "Charlie, you absolute menace." He stopped mid-sentence when he looked up and saw Elena. The recognition in his eyes was immediate, followed by something that might have been discomfort. "Ms. Martinez." "Mr. Whitmore." Elena's voice was ice. Sophie, oblivious to the tension, was already petting the dog with abandon.
"He's so soft."
"Can we keep him, Mama? Please?" "Absolutely not," Elena said, reaching for her daughter's hand. "Come on, Sophie. We need to go." "Wait." Alexander's voice was quieter than she remembered. Is this your daughter?" "These are my children, Sophie and Lucas." She didn't offer more information, didn't explain that these were the children she'd mentioned when she'd begged for her job. The children whose well-being had meant nothing to him. Lucas, having overcome his initial fear, was now cautiously approaching the dog. "What's his name?" "Charlie," Alexander answered, and Elena was surprised by the gentleness in his tone.
"He's still a puppy, really."
"Just turned 1. Hasn't quite learned his manners yet." "He's big for a puppy," Lucas observed seriously, reaching out to touch Charlie's ear.
"He is."
"Too big for a city apartment, my assistant keeps telling me." Alexander glanced at Elena, then away. "I'm sorry he frightened you." "We're fine." Elena's tone made it clear she wanted this encounter to end. "Say goodbye to the dog, kids. We have to go." "But Mama," Sophie started to protest. "Now, please." Something in Elena's voice must have conveyed the urgency, because both children reluctantly stepped back from Charlie. Sophie gave the dog one last pat, and Lucas waved solemnly. As Elena turned to leave, Alexander spoke again. "Ms. Martinez. How have you been?" She stopped, turning back slowly. In the morning sunlight, she could see that he looked different somehow.
"Tired, maybe."
There were shadows under his eyes that she didn't remember, and he seemed less formidable than he had in his penthouse. "We're managing," she said simply. "I'm glad to hear it." He paused, clearly struggling with something. "I wanted to, that is, I should have." "Should have what, Mr. Whitmore?" "Should have given me a reason? Should have considered that I have 2 children to feed before you threw me out like yesterday's newspaper." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but weeks of stress and sleepless nights had worn down her filter. "Charlie," sensing the tension, whined softly. Alexander flinched, as if she'd struck him. "You're right. You deserved better than that." "Yes, I did." Elena felt Sophie grip her hand tighter, confused by her mother's tone. She took a breath, moderating her voice for the children's sake. "But it doesn't matter now. I hope you found a replacement who suits you better. Goodbye, Mr. Whitmore." She walked away before he could respond, her spine straight and her head high, even though her heart was pounding. She didn't look back, didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing how much that brief encounter had shaken her. "Mama, why were you mad at the puppy man?" Sophie asked as they walked. "I wasn't mad at him, sweetheart. I'm just tired." "You're always tired now," Lucas observed with the blunt honesty of a 3-year-old. Elena's throat tightened. "I know, baby, but it's going to get better soon. I promise." It was a promise she desperately hoped she could keep. That evening, after another long shift, Elena returned home to find Mrs. Chin waiting up for her, an unusual occurrence. "There was a delivery for you today," the elderly woman said, gesturing to a large box sitting by Elena's apartment door. "Very fancy." The delivery man said it was urgent. Elena frowned, eyeing the box suspiciously. She wasn't expecting anything, and the elegant packaging with its cream-colored ribbons certainly didn't look like anything she would have ordered. Inside her apartment, with the twins still sleeping peacefully in their room, Elena carefully opened the box. Inside was an envelope sitting atop what appeared to be a very expensive dog bed, along with toys, treats, and various pet supplies. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. "Ms. Martinez, I have no right to ask you for anything, and I have no excuse for how I treated you. But if you would consider it, I'd like to offer you your position back with a significant raise and proper benefits, including health insurance for you and your children. Charlie seems to have taken a liking to your family, and to be honest, I could use help managing him. Consider this a job offer with different responsibilities, if that makes it easier to accept. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm hoping you might consider giving me a chance to make things right. Alexander Whitmore. P.S. The supplies are for Charlie, in case you're willing to help me train him. I clearly have no idea what I'm doing." Elena read the letter 3 times, her emotions warring between anger, suspicion, and desperate hope. The raise he'd mentioned was substantial, more than double what she'd been making before. The health insurance alone would be life-changing. Lucas's asthma medication, Sophie's upcoming dental work, all of it would finally be affordable. But could she trust him? He'd fired her once, without explanation. What would stop him from doing it again? She looked around her tiny apartment, at the water stain on the ceiling she couldn't afford to fix, at the twins' bedroom where they shared a single twin bed because she couldn't afford a second one, at the empty refrigerator because she'd had to choose between groceries and electricity this month. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Still, she wouldn't make it easy for him. The next morning, Elena stood outside Alexander Whitmore's building with Sophie and Lucas, her stomach churning with anxiety. She'd called the number on his letter, half expecting him not to answer. Instead, he picked up on the first ring and asked her to come by to discuss the position. "Remember," she told the twins as they rode the elevator up, "best behavior. This is Mama's work." "Is the puppy going to be there?" Sophie asked hopefully. "Probably. But that doesn't mean we can play all day." "Understand." Both children nodded solemnly, though Sophie was practically vibrating with excitement. Alexander answered the door himself, dressed more casually than Elena had ever seen him, jeans and a simple gray sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. Charlie bounded up immediately, tail wagging furiously as the twins squealed with delight. "Thank you for coming," Alexander said, having to raise his voice slightly over the chaos of an excited dog and delighted children. Please come in. The penthouse looked different somehow. Less pristine, more lived in. There were dog toys scattered across the formerly immaculate living room floor, and what appeared to be muddy paw prints on the white sofa. Elena couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. Keeping you busy, is he? Alexander ran a hand through his hair, looking sheepish. That's an understatement. I've had him for 3 weeks, and he's already destroyed 2 pairs of shoes, a leather chair, and my peace of mind. My assistant threatened to quit if I brought him to the office again. Why did you get a dog? The question slipped out before Elena could stop it. He was quiet for a moment, watching Charlie play with the twins. Honestly, I don't know. I was walking past a shelter, and he was there in the window, and he trailed off, shrugging. It was an impulse, not something I normally do. Elena could believe that. Alexander Whitmore didn't strike her as an impulsive man. Ms. Martinez, if we're going to work together, you should probably call me Elena. Elena. He said her name carefully, like he was testing it out. I want to apologize for how I handled your termination. It was unprofessional and unkind, and you deserved better. You still haven't told me why you did it. He was quiet for so long she didn't think he would answer. Then, quietly, my mother came to visit. She saw you working, saw how you were with the apartment, and He paused, jaw tight. She made a comment about how pretty you were. How convenient it must be for me. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks, anger and humiliation warring in her chest. So you fired me because your mother thought we were sleeping together? I fired you because I realized she wasn't entirely wrong. His gray eyes met hers, and there was something raw in them that made her breath catch. Not about us sleeping together. We weren't, obviously. But about how I'd started to notice you. Look forward to coming home. And that wasn't fair to you. You were my employee. It was inappropriate. Elena stared at him, speechless. Of all the explanations she'd imagined, this hadn't been one of them. So instead of acting like an adult and dealing with your feelings, you punish me for them? Her voice was sharp. Yes. He didn't make excuses, didn't try to justify it. It was cowardly and wrong, and I'm sorry. Sophie chose that moment to come running over, Charlie bounding at her heels. Mama. Charlie knows how to shake. Watch. She demonstrated, holding out her tiny hand, and Charlie obediently placed his paw in it. Lucas followed, wanting to show off his trick too. They're naturals with him, Alexander observed. Better than I am, certainly. Elena watched her children playing with the dog, saw the pure joy on their faces. When was the last time they'd been this carefree? What exactly would this job entail? Whatever you're comfortable with. Maintaining the apartment, yes, but also helping with Charlie. Walking him, training him, making sure he doesn't destroy what's left of my furniture. And he hesitated. I travel a lot for work, sometimes for weeks at a time. I'd need someone who could stay here, watch the apartment and the dog. I know that's asking a lot, especially with your children. We'd stay here? In the penthouse. There are 3 spare bedrooms. You and the twins could have your own space. I'd have my assistant set up a formal employment contract, salary, benefits, vacation time, sick leave, everything in writing. You'd be a full-time employee with protections. Elena's mind raced. Living here would mean no rent. The twins could each have their own room. They'd have space to play, security, stability. I'd want it in writing that you can't fire me without cause, she said. Real cause. Not because someone makes a comment or because you feel uncomfortable. Absolutely. And the twins come with me. Always. They're not negotiable. I wouldn't expect otherwise. He glanced at Sophie and Lucas, who were now trying to teach Charlie to roll over. They're welcome here. Why are you really doing this? Elena asked. The truth. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, watching Charlie lick Lucas's face while the little boy giggled. Because I looked at you in that park and I saw what I'd done. Not just firing you, but firing a mother of 2 small children without cause, without warning, without any consideration for what that might mean for your family. And I realized I'd become exactly what I always swore I wouldn't be. Which is my father. The words were bitter, cruel for cruelty's sake, caring more about my own comfort than about the people my decisions affect. There was a story there Elena could tell, pain that ran deep, but she didn't push. I'll want to review the contract before I agree to anything, she said. Of course. My attorney can have something drawn up by tomorrow. And I want your word that you'll be professional. What you said about noticing me, that can't happen. I can't afford to lose this job again, and I can't have that kind of complication in my life. You have my word. He extended his hand. Professional. Nothing more. Elena looked at his outstretched hand, then at her children playing happily with the golden retriever, then back at Alexander. Against her better judgment, she reached out and shook his hand. Okay, she said. 1-month trial. If it doesn't work, we part ways amicably, and you give me a good reference. Deal. As his hand closed around hers, warm and firm, Elena told herself she was doing this for Sophie and Lucas, for health insurance and stability, and the chance to give them something better. She absolutely was not thinking about the way his eyes had softened when he talked about noticing her, or the flutter in her stomach when he'd said her name. This was just a job. Nothing more. She'd make sure of that. The first week of the new arrangement was awkward, to say the least. Elena, Sophie, and Lucas moved into the penthouse with their meager belongings, which looked almost comically sparse in the spacious bedrooms Alexander had assigned them. The twins were in heaven. They'd never had their own rooms before, never had space to spread out and play without worrying about making too much noise. Elena had chosen the bedroom farthest from Alexander's master suite, a beautiful room with windows overlooking Central Park. It felt almost obscene to have so much space to herself, and she spent the first night lying awake, unable to shake the feeling that she was trespassing. Alexander, for his part, seemed equally uncomfortable with the new dynamic. He'd leave for the office early and return late, communicating mostly through polite notes left on the kitchen counter. Please order whatever groceries you need. Feel free to use any of the amenities. Charlie destroyed another throw pillow, my apologies. It was Sophie and Lucas who broke through the walls of tension. On their third evening in the penthouse, Alexander returned home to find his living room transformed into an elaborate obstacle course made of couch cushions, blankets, and kitchen chairs. Charlie was racing through it with wild abandon while the twins cheered him on, and Elena was trying unsuccessfully to restore order to the chaos. I'm so sorry, she said immediately, moving to dismantle the fort. They got carried away, and I was making dinner, and I didn't realize. No, it's... Alexander stood frozen in the doorway, his briefcase still in his hand. It's fine. I've just never seen the apartment like this. Like a disaster zone? Elena asked wryly, grabbing a cushion from Charlie's mouth. Like a home. The words hung in the air between them. Elena looked up, catching something vulnerable in his expression before he turned away. Mr. Whitmore. Sophie bounded over, grabbing his hand. Come play. We're training Charlie to be a circus dog. Sophie, let Mr. Whitmore get settled. Elena started. Actually, Alexander interrupted, setting down his briefcase, I'd like to see this circus dog in action. Elena watched in amazement as Alexander Whitmore, billionaire tech mogul, notorious workaholic, the man who'd once told Forbes that he considered free time a waste of resources, got down on the floor to play with her children and his unruly dog. He let Lucas show him how to guide Charlie through the obstacle course, and he laughed, actually laughed, when Sophie tried to teach the retriever to jump through a hula hoop and Charlie knocked the whole fort down instead. "Dinner's ready," Elena announced 30 minutes later, half expecting Alexander to retreat to his study as he usually did. Instead, he looked at the dining table she'd set, complete with the twins' plastic plates and sippy cups alongside the fine china. Are we eating together? I made enough for everyone. If you'd prefer to eat separately."
No.
The answer came quickly. "No, this is nice. I'd like to join you, if that's all right." Dinner was surprisingly easy. The twins chattered constantly, filling the silence that might otherwise have been uncomfortable. Lucas told Alexander all about the birds they'd seen in the park that morning, and Sophie explained in elaborate detail the story of the princess and the dragon she'd made up during quiet time. "And then the princess saved herself because she didn't need a prince," Sophie concluded firmly. "Right, Mama?" "That's right, baby." Elena smiled, catching Alexander's amused expression. "A modern fairy tale," he observed. "We're raising feminists," Elena said, then immediately worried that might be too familiar. But Alexander just nodded. "Good. The world needs more of them." After dinner, while Elena cleaned up, Alexander helped the twins get ready for bed, something that surprised everyone, including him. He read them a story, his deep voice stumbling slightly over the silly character voices, but trying nonetheless. "He's not very good at the voices," Sophie whispered to Lucas, not as quietly as she thought. Alexander caught Elena's eye, and they both suppressed smiles. When the twins were finally asleep, Elena found Alexander in the living room, Charlie's head resting on his lap while he stared out at the city lights. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being so patient with them." "I should thank you. I can't remember the last time I laughed like that." He scratched behind Charlie's ears absently. "Your children are remarkable. They're resilient. They've had to be." "Can I ask what happened?" "Their father." Elena tensed, debating how much to share. But something about the quiet darkness of the room made it easier. "Marco. We married young. I was barely 20. He was charming at first, attentive. By the time I realized he had a temper, I was pregnant." She sat down on the opposite end of the couch, keeping a careful distance. "The first time he hit me, I was 6 months along. I told myself it was a one-time thing, that he was stressed about becoming a father." Alexander's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. "It got worse after the twins were born. He'd apologize, promise to change, and I wanted to believe him. I wanted Sophie and Lucas to have a father." She laughed bitterly. "Stupid, right? Staying with someone who hurt me because I thought 2 parents were better than one." "Not stupid. Human." When the twins were 18 months old, he came home drunk and angry. He grabbed Sophie, just grabbed her and shook her because she was crying. That's when I knew I had to leave. Elena's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "I waited until he passed out, packed everything I could carry, and walked out with nothing but my babies and $500 I'd been hiding in a tampon box." "Jesus, Elena." "I came to New York because it was far away and big enough to disappear in. Mrs. Chin took us in that first month, wouldn't take any rent until I found work. She saved our lives." Elena looked at him. "That's why I could lose the job with you. It wasn't just about money. It was about proving that I could provide for them, that leaving Marco was the right choice." "It was the right choice." Alexander's voice was fierce. "You're an incredible mother. Anyone can see that. Some days I feel like I'm barely holding it together. That's called being a parent, I think. At least, that's what mine always seemed like. Barely holding it together, even with all the money and help in the world. It was Elena's turn to wait, sensing he needed to share something too. My father built his company from nothing, Alexander said slowly. He was brilliant, driven, and absolutely ruthless. My mother was his trophy wife, beautiful, cultured, completely miserable. They had me because it was expected, but neither of them had any idea what to do with a child. I'm sorry. I was raised by a rotation of nannies. The longest one stayed 3 years before my father fired her because I got too attached. He said emotional attachment made people weak, made them exploitable. Alexander's laugh was hollow. I think that's why I got Charlie. My therapist says I'm trying to prove I can care about something without it being a weakness. You have a therapist? 3 times a week. Dr. Morrison. She's the one who called me an emotionally constipated workaholic with attachment issues, which I thought was a bit harsh until I fired you for basically no reason and realized she was right. Elena shouldn't have laughed, but she couldn't help it. At least you're self-aware. Self-aware and trying to be better. Though I'll be honest, I have no idea what I'm doing. With Charlie, with this living arrangement, with any of it. He looked at her. But I'm glad you're here. You and the twins. You make this place feel less like a museum. More like a circus, you mean? Exactly. He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less guarded. I didn't realize how much I needed the circus. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the city twinkling below them, Charlie snoring softly between them. Can I ask you something? Elena said. Why tech? Why build a company? Alexander considered the question. Because code makes sense. It's logical, predictable. You input the right commands and you get the expected output. Unlike people. People are messy. Terrifying messy. He smiled wryly. But I'm learning that maybe that's not such a bad thing. That night, as Elena lay in her enormous bed, she thought about the man on the other side of the penthouse. The one who was trying so hard to be better, to be more human. The one who'd gotten down on the floor to play with her children and hadn't once complained about the chaos they brought into his ordered world. She thought about the walls she'd built around her own heart after Marco, the promises she'd made to herself about never depending on a man again, never trusting anyone but herself to take care of her children. But Alexander wasn't Marco. He wasn't even the cold businessman who'd fired her 4 weeks ago. He was something else entirely, something complicated and damaged and trying. Just like her. Maybe, she thought as she drifted off to sleep, maybe they could help each other figure out this messy, terrifying thing called being human. Over the next month, the penthouse underwent a transformation that had nothing to do with cleaning and everything to do with living. Sophie's artwork appeared on the refrigerator, colorful crayon drawings of dogs and castles and families. Lucas's growing rock collection took over a shelf in the living room, each stone carefully labeled with masking tape and wobbly 3-year-old handwriting. Charlie's toys were everywhere, despite Elena's best efforts to contain them. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Alexander's walls began to crumble. It started with small things. He began coming home earlier, joining them for dinner most nights. He'd ask about the twins' day, genuinely interested in Lucas's observations about pigeons or Sophie's elaborate dramatic retellings of playground politics. He started keeping his work laptop closed during meals, giving them his full attention. Elena watched it happen with a mixture of warmth and trepidation. She could see him softening, see the careful way he was learning to be around children, to be around people who cared about him without wanting anything from him. Why do you work so much? Lucas asked one evening during dinner, with the blunt curiosity of a child who didn't understand social filters. Lucas, Elena chided gently. That's not. It's okay, Alexander said. He set down his fork, considering the questions seriously. I suppose, because work is what I'm good at. Building things, fixing problems, making companies run better. But don't you want to play? Sophie asked, genuinely confused. I didn't really learn how to play when I was little. Both twins stared at him like he'd just said he'd never eaten ice cream. That's so sad, Sophie declared. We can teach you. And teach him they did. Alexander Whitmore, who'd once spent 16 hours straight coding the algorithm that would make him his first million, learned to play hide and seek, to build blanket forts, to stage elaborate tea parties for stuffed animals. He was terrible at all of it, approaching playtime with the same serious intensity he brought to board meetings, but the twins didn't care. They adopted him into their world with the easy acceptance of children who hadn't yet learned to be guarded. Elena tried to maintain her boundaries, to remember this was a job, but it got harder every day. Especially when she'd find Alexander on the floor with Lucas, both of them intently studying a bug they'd found by the window. Or when Sophie would fall asleep against his shoulder during movie night, and he'd carry her to bed with such gentle care that Elena's heart ached. I'm getting too comfortable here, she told Mrs. Chun during one of their coffee dates in the park. The older woman had become family, and Elena needed her wisdom. And that's bad because it's not real. This is temporary. He's my boss. Mrs. Chun gave her a knowing look. Is he? Or is he becoming something else? I can't let him become something else. I have to think about Sophie and Lucas. What happens when this arrangement ends? When he gets tired of the noise and the mess and the complications of having us here? Have you considered that maybe he won't? That maybe you're all exactly what he needs, just as much as he's what you need. I can't afford to think like that. Why not? Because I have too much to lose. But even as she said it, Elena knew she was already losing the battle against her own heart. It happened in tiny moments, the way Alexander remembered that Lucas couldn't have strawberries because of his allergies, how he'd started buying Sophie's favorite cereal without being asked, the morning she'd found him reading parenting books in his study at 2 a.m. Can't sleep? She'd asked from the doorway. He'd looked up, startled. Lucas had a nightmare about a monster under his bed. I didn't know what to do, but you were exhausted, so I sat with him until he fell back asleep. Now I'm trying to figure out if I handled it right. You did perfectly. Elena had sat down across from him, touched beyond words. Thank you. The book says nightmares are normal at this age. Something about developing imagination and processing fears. He looked almost vulnerable. I want to get this right. I don't want to mess them up the way my parents messed me up. Alexander. She'd waited until he met her eyes. You're not your father. You're not cold or cruel or indifferent. You're here at 2 a.m. reading parenting books because you care about a little boy's nightmare. That already makes you better than him. Something had shifted between them in that moment, in the quiet darkness of his study. A recognition, an acknowledgement of feelings neither of them was ready to name. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Elena was in the kitchen preparing dinner while the twins played in their room and Alexander worked in his study. Charlie, who'd been napping by the fireplace, suddenly jumped up and ran to the front door, barking frantically. Before Elena could investigate, the door flew open. A woman stalked in, elegant, perfectly coiffed, wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than Elena made in 6 months. Her resemblance to Alexander was striking enough that Elena knew immediately who she was. "Where's my son?" the woman demanded, her cold gaze sweeping over Elena dismissively. "Mrs. Whitmore." Elena kept her voice steady. "He's in his study. I'll let him know you're here. I don't need you to announce me in my son's home." She moved toward the hallway, but Charlie positioned himself between her and the rest of the apartment, still barking. Charlie, enough. Alexander's voice came from behind them. He emerged from his study, his expression hardening when he saw his mother. What are you doing here? I'm your mother. I don't need an invitation to visit. Actually, you do. I've asked you to call first. Mrs. Whitmore's eyes narrowed, then swept to Elena and back to her son.
I see.
The help is still here. I thought you'd come to your senses about that particular situation. Elena is not the help. She's my... Alexander paused, seeming to struggle with the right word. She lives here. With her children. Her children? Mrs. Whitmore's voice rose. Alexander, tell me you haven't. Mama? Sophie appeared in the hallway, Lucas right behind her. Both children took one look at the angry stranger and ran straight to Elena, who instinctively moved to shield them. Mrs. Whitmore stared at the twins, her expression a mixture of shock and disdain. This is what you've reduced yourself to? Playing house with the maid and her brats. That's enough. Alexander's voice was deadly quiet. You need to leave. I will not.
Someone needs to talk sense into you.
This woman is clearly taking advantage. I said that's enough. Alexander's shout echoed through the penthouse. Charlie barked louder, and Elena felt the twins trembling against her legs. She'd had enough. Kids, go to your room, she said firmly.
Now.
For once, neither child argued. They disappeared down the hall, and Elena turned to face Mrs. Whitmore with all the courage she'd developed leaving an abusive husband and building a life from nothing. You don't get to come into this home and speak about my children that way. You don't get to make assumptions about me or my relationship with your son. And you certainly don't get to upset him in his own home. Mrs. Whitmore looked like she'd been slapped. How dare you? No. How dare you? Elena's voice was steady but fierce. I don't know what kind of mother treats their child the way you've treated Alexander, but I know this. Those two children and there are more loved in one day than your son was in his entire childhood. So maybe before you judge my parenting, you should take a long look at your own. The silence was deafening. Alexander, Mrs. Whitmore said coldly, you will choose. This woman and her children, or your family. I already have. Alexander moved to stand beside Elena, his hand finding hers. They are my family, and you need to leave. Mrs. Whitmore's composure finally cracked. For just a moment, Elena saw hurt flash across her face, quickly replaced by icy rage. You'll regret this. The only thing I regret is not standing up to you sooner. After she left, the apartment felt eerily quiet. Alexander was still holding Elena's hand, his grip tight enough to hurt. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I'm so sorry you and the kids had to see that. Are you okay? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I don't know. I've been trying to get her approval my whole life, and I just chose you over her. Chose Sophie and Lucas over her. Alexander. He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense. I'm falling in love with you, Elena. I'm in love with your strength and your kindness and the way you've made this empty apartment into a home. I'm in love with your children and their chaos and their joy. And I know that's not fair because you work for me and you have every reason not to trust me, but I can't keep pretending this is just a job anymore. Elena's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Every logical thought told her to step back, to protect herself and her children. But her heart, her foolish, hopeful heart, wanted to step forward. I'm terrified, she whispered. So am I. I have to think about Sophie and Lucas. They're everything to me. I know. They're everything to me too. He cupped her face gently. I want to be in their lives, Elena. I want to be in your life. Not as a boss or a benefactor, but as someone who loves you. All of you. What if it doesn't work? What if? Then we'll figure it out together. But please give us a chance. Give me a chance to be the man you deserve, the man your children deserve. Elena thought about the man who'd fired her without explanation and the man who now read bedtime stories and researched nightmares. The man who'd been taught that emotions were weakness and was learning, slowly, to be vulnerable. She thought about Sophie and Lucas, who called him Mr. Alex, and had started drawing pictures of him with the family. About how much they'd all grown to love him. And she thought about her own heart, scarred but healing, learning to trust again. Okay, she breathed. Okay, yes. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home. Section 6. The Unthinkable. 6 months later, Elena woke up to find her bed empty. She could hear voices from the kitchen, Alexander's deep rumble mixed with the twins' excited chatter. Saturday mornings had become his time with Sophie and Lucas, letting Elena sleep in while he made them pancakes, though maid was a generous term for his attempts at cooking. She padded down the hallway, pausing in the doorway to watch. Alexander was wearing one of his expensive dress shirts covered in flour. Sophie was standing on a stool mixing batter with more enthusiasm than skill, and Lucas was carefully arranging blueberries into a smiley face on a finished pancake. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Alexander said when he noticed her, his smile bright and unguarded, so different from the man she'd first met. "Mama, we made you breakfast in bed, but you woke up too early," Sophie accused. "Sorry, baby. Should I go back to bed?" "It's okay. You can eat at the table like a regular person," Lucas said solemnly, making the adults laugh. This had become their routine, their life. Elena and Alexander had taken things slowly, dating despite living in the same space, building a foundation of trust and friendship underneath the romance. The twins had adapted with the easy resilience of children who felt safe and loved. Charlie had finally learned not to jump on the furniture, mostly. And Alexander had blossomed into someone Elena barely recognized from that first cold day in the penthouse. He'd cut back his work hours, started seeing Dr. Morrison 4 times a week instead of 3, and was learning, day by day, how to be part of a family. "I have something to tell you," he said later that evening, after the twins were in bed. They were curled up on the couch, Charlie sprawled across their feet. "My mother reached out." Elena tensed immediately. They hadn't heard from Mrs. Whitmore since that awful day. "She wants to meet. To apologize." He took Elena's hand. "I told her I'd think about it, but only if you're comfortable. Only if she can treat you and the twins with respect." "What do you want to do?" "Honestly, part of me wants to tell her to go to hell."
He sighed.
"But Dr. Morrison says that holding on to anger just hurts me. That I can forgive her without giving her power over my life anymore. Then maybe we should meet her. Together." The meeting was arranged for the following Sunday in a neutral location, a small cafe Elena had chosen specifically because it was warm and casual, nothing like the cold formality of Mrs. Whitmore's usual environment. The older woman was already there when they arrived, the twins holding tightly to Elena's hands while Alexander kept a protective hand on her back. Mrs. Whitmore looked smaller somehow, less imposing than Elena remembered. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "All of you." Sophie and Lucas pressed closer to Elena, uncertain. "These are my children," Elena said. "Sophie and Lucas." "I know." Mrs. Whitmore's voice was soft. I've been following Alexander's social media. I've seen the pictures." Alexander had indeed started posting on Instagram, photos of the twins at the park, of Charlie stealing food off the counter, of Elena laughing at something one of the kids had said. His life, documented in moments of joy he'd never experienced before. "I came to apologize," Mrs. Whitmore continued. "To all of you. What I said about your children was unconscionable. And what I did to Alexander his whole life was—" She paused, her composure cracking slightly. "I was raised to believe that showing emotion was weakness, that love made you vulnerable. So I taught my son the same thing, and I A single tear rolled down her cheek. I see the man he's become despite me, and I see how happy he is with you, and I realize what I lost by being too afraid to love him properly. It was, perhaps, the most honest thing any of them had heard from her. Why now? Alexander asked quietly. Because I'm 62 years old, and I'm alone, and I've been watching my son build a beautiful family while I have nothing but regrets. She looked at Elena. You're a remarkable mother. I can see that in how your children look at you, how they trust you. I was never that for Alexander, and I'm sorrier than you'll ever know. Elena felt something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness, exactly, but the beginning of understanding. They were all just people, scarred and struggling and trying to be better. We have boundaries, Elena said firmly. If you want to be part of this family, you treat all of us with respect. You don't criticize my parenting, you don't make assumptions, and you definitely don't say cruel things about my children. Agreed. And you have to apologize to Alexander. Really apologize for all of it. Mrs. Whitmore turned to her son, and for the first time, Elena saw genuine emotion in the woman's eyes. I'm sorry, Alexander. I'm sorry I was never the mother you deserved. I'm sorry I taught you that being strong meant being alone. You've become an extraordinary man, and it's in spite of me, not because of me. Alexander's jaw worked, emotions warring across his face. Then Sophie, bless her fearless heart, walked over to Mrs. Whitmore and took her hand. It's okay to be sad, she said seriously. Mama says everyone gets sad sometimes, even grown-ups. Do you want a hug? Hugs help. Mrs. Whitmore stared at the little girl offering her such uncomplicated compassion, and then, to everyone's shock, she started to cry real tears, the kind that came from somewhere deep and long buried. Yes, she whispered. I would like that very much. Sophie hugged her fiercely, and Lucas, not wanting to be left out, joined in. Elena watched Alexander watching his mother being embraced by her children, saw the complexity of emotions playing across his face, pain and hope, and the beginning of healing. Later, after they'd shared coffee and tentative conversation, after Mrs. Whitmore had promised to work on herself and to earn their trust slowly, they returned to the penthouse. I can't believe Sophie did that, Elena said, shaking her head. Your daughter is braver than all of us combined. Alexander pulled her close. She gets that from her mother. I was terrified. Me too. But we did it together. That night, after the twins were asleep, Alexander led Elena out to the penthouse balcony. The city stretched out below them, millions of lights twinkling in the darkness. Do you remember the first time you came here? He asked. For your interview? I was so nervous I thought I might throw up in your fancy lobby. He laughed. I remember thinking you seemed too good to be true. Too kind, too genuine. It scared me. So you fired me. So I fired you like an idiot. He turned to face her, taking both her hands. But then you came back. You gave me another chance, and you've been giving me chances every day since. You've taught me how to love, how to be part of a family, how to be human. Alexander. He dropped to one knee, and Elena's heart stopped. I know this is fast. I know we've only been together 6 months. But I also know that I want to spend every day for the rest of my life with you, and Sophie and Lucas. I want to make pancakes on Saturday mornings and read bedtime stories and teach our kids, because there are kids now in every way that matters. I want to teach them that it's okay to be vulnerable, that love isn't weakness, it's strength. He pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a simple, beautiful ring. Elena Martinez, will you marry me? Will you let me be a father to your children? Will you make me the luckiest man in the world and build a real family with me? Elena was crying, nodding before she could even form words.
Yes.
Yes, of course yes. He slipped the ring on her finger, then stood and kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. I love you, he whispered against her lips. I love all of you so much. We love you too. A small cough made them turn. Sophie and Lucas stood in the doorway, Charlie behind them. Were you spying? Elena asked, trying to sound stern through her tears. Maybe, Sophie admitted. Does this mean Mr. Alex is going to be our daddy? Alexander looked at Elena, then knelt down to the twins' level. Only if you want me to be. I know I can't replace your biological father. He was mean to Mama, Lucas interrupted. We don't want him. We want you. Then I would be honored to be your daddy. Alexander's voice cracked. If that's okay with you. Both children launched themselves at him, nearly knocking him over. Charlie barked and jumped into the pile, and Elena joined them, all of them laughing and crying and holding each other. 3 years later, Elena stood in the same penthouse, now truly their home, watching Alexander chase their newest addition, 18-month-old Emma, around the living room while Sophie and Lucas tried to teach Charlie a new trick. Mrs. Whitmore was coming for Sunday dinner, as she did every week now, slowly building the relationship with her son and grandchildren she'd never had before. The billionaire, who'd once fired his maid for no reason, had become the man who coached Sophie's soccer team, who stayed up late helping Lucas with science projects, who'd learned to braid hair and wipe tears and show up every single day for the family he'd chosen. And the maid who'd thought her life was over when she lost her job had found something she'd never dared to dream of, a partner who saw her worth, children who were thriving, and a love that healed old wounds and built new foundations. Mama, Emma shrieked, toddling over with her arms up. Up. Elena scooped her daughter up, breathing in that sweet baby smell, and caught Alexander's eye across the room. He smiled at her, that special smile he reserved only for his family, and mouthed, I love you. Sometimes, Elena thought, the worst moments of your life led you exactly where you needed to be. Sometimes getting fired was the beginning of a story, not the end. And sometimes, just sometimes, toddlers with their fearless hearts and unconditional love could do the unthinkable. They could teach broken people how to be whole again. The end.